The Canby Report was produced and recorded on the traditional territories of the Coquitlam, Mississaugas of the Credit, Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples. It's September 23rd, 2025, and there are 388 days left until the Vancouver municipal elections. This is the Canby Report. I'm Matthew Naylor.
I'm Ian Bushfield.
388 days is so close to 365. We are closing in on it.
Just over a year. It's been a very busy summer.
Yeah,
the last couple months. I took a nice little trip around the Pacific. Back to school then became chaotic, but we're back. There was a couple posts from people like McElroy and others going, why are people launching their campaigns earlier and earlier? Because that's the vibe we kind of get compared to 2022 or 2018, the elections we've also covered. And there's theories, there's reasons out there. Maybe it's not even real, but it is a very early start to the election season this year.
I remember we started this podcast in the same year as the election. That was very close to Sylvester kind of kicking off, and that was in the same year. It does seem like it's getting earlier. If you wish to support us in our quest to cover the ongoing politics of Vancouver and its environs, of course, please visit us and subscribe and contribute at patreon.com/Canby Report.
Yes, we'll pick up the pace from once every 2 months or so as we get into the busy, hectic political season. Patreon.com/Canby Report.
The Union of BC Municipalities is meeting. I was going to say like a kind of Woodstock for municipalities nerds. It's a very boring version of that, I'm sure, but with equally zany ideas, I think, though probably less chemically motivated.
Oh, I'm sure the liquor is flowing at the petroleum-sponsored Resource Works evenings.
Many things have been said about what's, going on in the cities, including, I think, a kind of erroneous idea that crime is getting worse when, in fact, crime tends to be falling in broad strokes. Justin McElroy speaks to this a little bit, but compassion fatigue.
Yeah, this is a term Leonard Krogh was throwing around for a couple of years and seems to be picking up from the Nanaimo mayor and former NDP MLA. They have a whole session at UBCM on disordered downtowns. There are places that are struggling, and it's difficult to manage. There's a lot of conflation in the discussion between street homelessness, drug use, and petty and violent crime. These are all getting mixed together when sometimes they're related, sometimes they're entirely different issues. It doesn't seem like solutions are coming out of it, but a lot of frustration.
I understand that frustration because it does feel like the root causes of these issues, while we talk a big game about whether or not you should address the symptoms or the cause, both of those things require quite a bit of money. And while hiring new police officers to increase policing, I'm not going to say that it does nothing, but it doesn't address that underlying cause, because you can't criminalize people out of being poor. That's not how that works.
Yeah. Housing is still a major issue across the province, and people don't have homes, and it's just hard to live when you don't have that. So I get the tensions of those discussions there. UBCM's always so fascinating, right? Because it's this time for all these local politicians to get together, a lot bring forward passionate issues to debate and discuss, and maybe they get full endorsement from all municipalities in the province, and then it's kind of left there. Like, obviously the municipalities keep trying to champion it, but it's up to the province whether they do anything with that or not. The other angle of UBCM that's always fascinating is the provincial politicians also show up to speak to the plebs, as it were, and explain where things are. So you have ministers like Christine Boyle and Spencer Chandra Herbert talking about the different policies. It seems like there's a lot of disappointment this year. There's frustration around potential changes to the Heritage Act, where municipalities don't feel like they've been consulted more than a 3-hour webinar on what that will implicate for them. There's no promise to bring the bus line from Vancouver to Whistler that has been promised in the provincial election campaign and elsewhere. And there's just kind of questions about all the other issues we talked about.
One of the things that has come up is a mandatory province-wide code of conduct for municipalities and councils. This is something that I think would be a useful standard for municipalities, especially given all the issues we've had, whether in the Okanagan or the Fraser Valley, of councils and mayors behaving badly. I think there are a lot of challenges trying to ask municipalities in the midst of these controversies to have, already created these codes of conduct or really have exactly what these codes of conduct mean, because they tend to be toothless.
Yeah, we'll come back to a code of conduct story in Vancouver later in the show. But one of the challenges right now is the current status quo is after an election, a council has to decide whether or not to have a code of conduct. And they can just choose not to. They can choose to have a bad one. And I think they're actually limited in what powers they can put in, because they can't remove someone from council. They can't even suspend someone briefly from council. So the penalties are kind of, we've released this letter so people know they did a bad thing.
Everything was right as rain after that. Good for them.
We'll see what the province has to bring forward. I know they're talking about bringing forward legislation on that this fall, so we'll come back to that story.
Moving down to Vancouver, we have got just a true efflorescence of politics and political parties. Starts with Rebecca Bly, who, after being first kind of drummed out of the NPA, or rather, not drummed out, but rather made to feel unwelcome enough that she needed to leave.
She was the first to take a principled stand and leave that party in 2020.
And then subsequently a
dishonorable discharge,
basically, from the ABC caucus.
Prior to a by-election that they went to shit the bed on anyway.
She has launched a new party. This is Vote Vancouver, and will be running for mayor against Ken Sim.
Absolutely worst name I have seen in a while. And there's a lot of meaningless names, but you can't even Google Vote Vancouver and get anything related to her. It pulls up the municipal election website. It pulls up articles about elections in Vancouver. It's bad for SEO. I don't know what she stands for from that name. I mean, that's true of a lot of them, but it's god-awful.
I still don't think it's the worst name in the Lower Mainland, even. The switch in the party names in New Westminster is actively confusing, and this is just nothing. It's a big nothing.
Reading some of her statements, it seems like she wants to run on what ABC stood for without being Ken Sim, which honestly isn't a bad path.
It's not, because ABC did very well in the last election, but Ken Sim has attached an anchor to that party, and seems like he might be heading the way of a Kennedy Stewart-esque blowout.
Let's ditch the Bitcoin stuff. Let's ditch the podcast bro energy and get back to
with no sense of self-awareness.
No. I'm not running for mayor of Vancouver, Matthew.
That's fair.
It'll be interesting to watch her move forward, because I think being a sitting councillor who's had multiple elected experience gives her more credibility than some of the other vessels we're about to talk about.
Yes, like the Vancouver Liberals. Now, this is the party that has been launched by Kareem Alam, political strategist and former ABC apparatchik. He has had a bit of a falling out with Ken Sim. It should be noted that this is the second party we are talking about today that is created in direct response to a falling out with Ken Sim. This party, the Vancouver Liberals Party, is his vehicle for politics in the next municipal election.
Yes, his explicit quote on the Vancouver Liberals website is, "I want to run for mayor because I think I can do a better job than Ken." It's impressive that Ken Sim has been able to inspire such vitriol among his former
allies.
friends that they all want to take him down. I don't even know if Ken Sim will run for mayor again.
I think he should run against Ken Sim. I think that's probably the best path for him. Though there is I'll say I think this is the strangest of the three parties, at least in terms of the construction, and that's the BC Conservatives, or rather the Municipal Conservatives of BC. For it is not merely one municipality that the Vancouver Conservatives or the province-wide Conservatives are contesting, but rather so many.
Yeah, lots in the Fraser Valley, Abbotsford, Chilliwack, Maple Ridge, Langley Township, interior Kamloops, Kelowna, Fort St. John, and then Vancouver, West Van, Saanich, Surrey, Richmond. There's also a separate Burnaby Conservatives that is registered by Mario Francis, who I believe was previously involved in the NPA. So lots is happening. What's interesting about this local Conservative Party is it's one of the few times we've seen a local party register across jurisdictions. There's Parents' Voice, the anti-SOGI group that's run in a bunch of different school board elections, and they are still registered to run again. But the Conservatives, it's unclear exactly what their strategy is, but they've tapped former MP Carrie Lynn Findlay for its advisory board and to head up candidate recruitment and policy development. It seems like it's pretty closely tied to the provincial Conservative Party.
I mean, it's not a terrible idea for a provincial party to have municipal farm teams effectively. Like,
It's how most countries in the world work.
Yes. I will say this is kind of how the parties normally function, whether it's the UK or the US. People run as Democrats or Republicans or Lib Dems or Labour or Conservatives. It's the same political organization voting for all of them. There are reasons why Canada doesn't have that between provincial and federal, but especially given that municipalities are creatures of the province, there is a little more synergy between province and municipality.
Like, Canada's unique about this, right? So it is a bit weird to see it, and my suspicion is it's going to flop hard. We see, even in places where there are affiliations between, like, the Burnaby Citizens Association is technically affiliated with the provincial NDP, which is affiliated with the federal NDP, but people in Vancouver didn't want to vote for the local NDP when it existed briefly. Local political parties that are explicitly tied or have the same branding as provincial and federal ones, I don't know if people are going to bite on it, especially outside of municipalities that have a tradition of parties like Vancouver and a handful of others. Most of BC, even though they can have parties, has this like hyper-independent vibe for their city council that they don't want to see partisan politics come. There's quotes in a Castanet article that Kamloops Council does not want to see political parties locally. I see that in Alberta, where political parties are trying to form. And you see it on the left and the center-right. And you basically see it outside of anyone who is openly partisan. It's like, yeah, we shouldn't have political parties locally. And there's good arguments to have political parties locally, but I don't know if they'll win the voters over.
Yeah.
And that applies to Karima Lam's Liberals just as much as this broad conservative movement.
And like, I think that's reasonable. Personally, I think political parties at a local level are probably a good thing. I'm not exactly sure what the nature of the opposition is. You know, I suppose I can see a argument that it might make politics more acrimonious, but I've also seen councils that are not partisan be just the worst. Speaking of Kamloops, for example.
I think people assume parties restrict independent political thought among the candidates and members of it, rather than facilitate the passage of collective values.
And I see how that can be a concern, but if we look at how political parties function in Vancouver, you can just have a separate thought and then a whole new political party springs fully formed from your forehead. So I think they're probably a better heuristic tool for voters than a detriment to the idea of local democracy more broadly.
They're definitely necessary in an at-large system where you have hundreds of names on the ballot and you have to go, who are these people? But Matthew, what if we could end the at-large system?
What if we could end the at-large system? I think we've talked on this podcast before about how the practice of at-large voting in municipalities is maybe not the best, though we certainly understand that there are challenges with the alternative of wards. If we are going to try and change it, we might have to hurry up because former Mayor Kennedy Stewart has launched a court challenge and a broader campaign to get municipal elections moved from a at-large system to something.
Yes, the Fix City Hall campaign, fixcityhall.ca, featuring a raft of NDP names. Libby Davies, Mike Harcourt,
Finn Donnelly was in there.
Donnelly's in there, David Chivnovsky, people who have been around center-left politics in Metro Van for decades. And bizarrely, he couldn't find someone outside that circle to get in there.
I mean, this is the Kennedy Stewart story, though. How did you fail to work with progressive colleagues last election? Why did you feel you needed your own political party? What was the point of this? Why didn't you run with one city? I don't get it. And then there's this aspect of tilting at windmills, which is where it's appropriate to turn to this court case, which doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, he's launching a lawsuit with two constitutional arguments. At-large system violates freedom of expression, Section 2A of the Charter, and it also violates Section 15, the equality rights. The freedom of expression arguments are based on similar arguments that were in the Toronto versus Ford case. When Doug Ford shrunk city council, he removed the right of voters to hear from more perspectives and the right of candidates to express themselves to more people. And that had a little sway at the first court and then was thrown out and moved along with. In this case, the at-large system, it's too hard to talk to that many people and therefore is restricting your expression.
I mean, this also sounds like a case against public hearings, but honestly, I think that's probably a bigger problem in terms of municipal politics and representation. I just don't buy it as an argument. Like, it's already been adjudicated by higher courts. I don't know if that one made it all the way to the Supreme Court, but I can't imagine that this isn't going to be raised as at least a persuasive, similar fact pattern.
The other angle is the equality rights, the idea being that at-large systems disenfranchise marginalized groups who are geographically concentrated. The 2018 election saw an all-white council with Pete Fry elected. A different system, like wards, can get representation from groups that can't get through in an at-large system. So there's an equality democratic imperative there.
And that I also don't buy, because on the face of it, it doesn't disenfranchise them. That's, for one, just not the right word to be using here, because the franchise is extended to them. Saying they are inadequately represented, or this kind of creates a malapportionment, or even those are hard to justify, because on its face, the at-large system is technically perfect, if you know what I mean. I'm not actually defending it as a system so much as saying that, like, it does give every person a vote to elect, or rather 10 votes. It's not anti-democratic in the way this is claiming.
Yeah, I'm not fully won over by the arguments. They did get a legal opinion from the Arve Findlay law firm and will be moving forward with their case. I'll be curious to watch it. I think there's some novel arguments in here. Like, one of the things that they're most up against is municipalities aren't really protected by Section 3. They're not recognized by the Constitution. They are, like you mentioned earlier, a creature of the province. So the province can kind of set them up however it wants, provided it's not overtly racist.
British property style stuff.
Yeah. But you don't have a right to a municipality.
Yeah.
So I think the political angle they're taking, the list building, is a little bit more interesting. Be curious how much momentum they get with that. Like all electoral reform efforts, it's such a high bar to cross because the status quo bias is so large. People don't think about this issue They get a little bit annoyed when they actually have to vote because every system has its problems. I think at large has more problems than most,
Yeah.
but they also don't have an agreed alternative. They say wards are one option, but our campaign is open to any other option.
And I think that is the biggest weakness of this campaign, is that you can't say, not this, then what? And have no answer. Truly come up with something. If it's wards, it's wards. I think that's the least creative solution. Best system, bizarrely, is something that Kennedy Stewart kind of accidentally backed his way into promising during the referendum on electoral reform, which was he wanted to have Vancouver become what the province, or rather what Vancouver wanted for the province for itself. I think that would be challenging, creating some kind of mixed system between wards. I think that you could get creative in how you address this, come up with a system that is better than either wards or strict at large. Because, like, you know, I think that Toronto is a good example of why wards on its own is not great, because it does effectively entrench people for very long periods of time. You know, people getting elected election after election after election, and then not having any kind of citywide vision. I think you can get both. I didn't launch a campaign to change it.
Matthew, I think you're wrong. I think the weakest part of this entire campaign is that when he was asked by Dan Famano in a, nice interview about launching this, hey, are you going to run for office again? He answered, I'm actively thinking about it.
What?
Which, don't throw that into your launch of a different thing.
Yeah.
Also, I think he's a nice guy with earnest ambition. I just don't think municipal politics is for him at this point.
Moving down to the end of the SkyTrain, Langley has erupted into civil war.
This has been brewing for a while. I think we've talked about the fight over policing. We're kind of relitigating the fight that led to Langley's, the township and the city, which is that the people in the rural area didn't want to pay for this urban area. In that case, it was the urban area required streetlights, and the farmers didn't need those and didn't want to pay taxes for those. Now it's there's crime in the city and not crime in the township, and why should the township have to pay for the RCMP at the same time? And Eric Woodward, Langley Township Mayor, has decided the solution is a hostile takeover to reamalgamate the Langleys, and he has launched a political party that will run candidates in both the township and city, with the view of pushing out city mayor Nathan Paschal and moving towards a amalgamated
an Omni Langley.
Omni Langley.
All of this is kind of par for the course. Whenever there has been split, whether it's the Langleys or the North Vancouvers, it does tend to be over the costs of starting up a city, which are substantial, I do not deny. The thing that is very frustrating about Mayor Woodward's comments is that he seems to think that the township is paying the bill for the activities of the city of Langley, or what have you, leaving aside that they're separate municipalities entirely and that they backed out of their policing agreement. There's greater population density in the city of Langley, and you do tend to see slightly elevated levels of crime where there is more people in close proximity to one another. But rural areas do not pay for cities. Cities and rural areas pay for suburbs. That is how our ridiculous system works. Cities and rural areas subsidize suburban living. Is the city of Langley basically just a very large suburb? Kind of.
The township definitely is at this point.
I don't think the city of Langley is the lawless hellscape that Mayor Woodward seems to imply.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to the idea of Langley amalgamation. The boundary of the city of Langley is now surrounded by more city, run by a separate government. Some of it is run by Surrey because the lines make no sense. Mm-hmm. A bunch of it is farmland, and then there's another urban area in the township. Maybe his hostile takeover will be successful, but it does seem like Woodward is eager to make lots of enemies as he has launched defamation lawsuits against everyone who has ever vexed him. This includes people he's run against in the past. Rich Coleman has to come up in a story like this.
Of course.
Others.
I'm so delighted. I actually think, whether or not I agree with some of the underlying thoughts behind it, do I think that the Langleys should have been divided? Probably not. I think this is the correct way to go about something like this, which is put your name on the ballot, let people vote. And if you win, do the thing you want. And if you don't, go home. I will note, and this is just a little interesting, and it did come up in the story, basically the Cascades Casino, which is in the city of Langley, generates about $7 or $8 million a year for the city. The township of Langley has the highest debt load, or one of the highest debt loads of any municipality of the province. So, as to the question of who's paying for the township of Langley, it seems like nobody is at the moment, or the banks.
People don't seem to like Woodward and have made a bunch of Facebook groups criticizing him, targeting a number of contracts that he and the city have signed, making allegations. Also involved in these Facebook groups like Langley Township Watch is Angelo Isidoro, who is executive director of the BC Conservative Party.
Okay.
It's just a fascinating little bit of legal drama. I also flagged this story from the Investigative Journalism Foundation that notes that when he was elected, Woodward put a bunch of money into this foundation, which never incorporated as a charity, and so its books aren't open. And they started to go, hey, what happened to that $55 million? And it seems like that nonprofit has never completed its annual financials, which are publicly accessible, or should be, as a nonprofit. And so these journalists have the registrar asking Eric Woodward's foundation, where's your money?
Yeah.
And the answer is we don't know.
One thing we do know is that it is the end of an era in Richmond, as Mayor Malcolm Brodie will not seek re-election after 25 years in the role. What a time it has been in Richmond. Malcolm Brodie, first elected in 2001. He had been on city council prior to that. He has won every election. Basically, I think some of them he wasn't even opposed, but it has been the Brodie era in the city of Richmond, and that will require some torch passing. And I don't know exactly who's going to be stepping up, but it is a time of transition.
Yeah, he has been on council since 1996 and mayor since 2001. He was first elected with the Richmond NPA, but has been an independent for a while. Longest serving mayor in Richmond's history, surpassing Rudy Grauer, who served from 1930 to 1949. It'll be interesting. I think Coquitlam Mayor Richard Stewart is also tentatively retiring. He said that before the last election, before changing his mind, because he wanted to see Riverview's adaptation completed. But I have no word on if he's moving out of the office. In both cases, it will be a big shakeup because they've been pretty entrenched.
Definitional, in terms of their influence on council. Stewart also very specifically instrumental in getting some major changes to their city pushed through, and then seeing them through, as you mentioned. It's going to be a change. And one little bit of trivia that I think is notable is that since 1973 in Richmond, there have been 3 mayors. Which
you talk about the wards entrenching. Local politicians just get entrenched because people don't care enough.
Yes.
And media doesn't cover them enough, which is what we're trying to do here. Patreon.com/Campy Report.
City politicians might stay put for a long time, but city managers are very mobile. Donnie Van Dyke, a former University Model Parliament alum with myself, and the former city manager of Delta now is been appointed the city manager for the city of Vancouver.
Yes, Paul Mockery was dismissed earlier this year by Ken Sim. They brought in Donnie Van Dyke. Mockery has a cushy severance package that will cover up to 24 months of his salary. It will be reduced if he does find another job up to that amount, but in the meantime, he gets $400,000 a year for saying goodbye to the city that he's managed for 14 years.
Well,
Do with that what you will. People get severance packages.
yeah, I think we can all celebrate his restraint for not founding a political party.
Oh, speaking of Vancouver, we mentioned the Integrity Commissioner. Last summer, we had a lot of drama around the Integrity Commissioner as Ken Sim went to kibosh her entire office only to have complaints strategically filed against everyone on council. And now we have both the results of those investigations and the conclusion of that effort to shutter the office and review its work.
And the answer is they're not going to shutter the office. Staff have recommended more powers for the Integrity Commissioner.
Yeah, so taking it from the top, the complaints against Sim and ABC councillors alleged they were having secret meetings. They were having illegal secret meetings because you can't have a quorum of council meeting to discuss council business in private. They need to have open meetings under the Vancouver Charter. The Integrity Commissioner interviewed most people. Brian Montague told her to pound dirt. After that, the investigation comes out. They were caucusing, which amounted to secret meetings, and they shouldn't have done that. Now, you might think a political party exists to caucus, and it does, but you can't do it if you have a majority.
Yeah, which...
It's the tension of our system. It's a contradiction.
Yeah, I think that does put ABC in a kind of difficult position, but maybe you just have to draw lots and someone has to not attend caucus every week.
One of the critical things pointed out is amendments were basically drafted in these closed-door meetings, brought to council like fait accompli. So there wasn't an ability for council to consider it with an open mind because it was just sprung on the other councillors. And so that's why...
That is the stated reason, and I think that is a thing that should be we should try to avoid. But I also feel like our municipal governments are not bastions of efficiency, especially at the political level. Having caucuses isn't bad and should be something that can be worked with.
Yes. On the code of conduct side, this report comes to council and gets duly noted, essentially, as we discussed. The Integrity Commissioner has no powers. The Integrity Commissioner's review of its own body, or this external review, concluded they should be more independent and have more powers. The city should make efforts to improve its code of conduct and ask the province to give it more powers so that this isn't such a farce.
Well, and
with no disrespect to the Integrity Commissioner.
No, for sure. I think that she has done incredible work with very limited powers. So I think that as BC considers whether it's going to implement this mandatory code of conduct, looking at the kind of toothlessness of the current system is something that would be wise.
I just want to conclude this, right? Because that motion that had been deferred to shutter the Integrity Commissioner had been deferred repeatedly because they were all under investigation, so they couldn't have quorum to vote on it. It finally made it to council and was ruled frivolous and out of order earlier this year.
Not with a bang, but with a whimper. One other elected official who is not making a ton of noise at their meetings is Vancouver Park Board Commissioner Marie-Claire Howard, who was elected with ABC Vancouver. She is rarely at the meetings of the park board, though just enough that she does not get automatically removed.
Officially, you have to attend every fourth meeting. If you have 4 unexcused absences, you would be disqualified under the Vancouver Charter. She has had 3 separate absences of 3 meetings in a row and has missed 6 of 10 park board meetings in 2025 alone. So it seems like she is showing up the bare minimum. She doesn't think it's worth reviewing how much she is attending because that would be a waste of staff time and taxpayer dollars. Like paying her to not show up.
This has been raised by fellow Commissioner Brendan Bastiavansky, who I hope gets reelected because I've worked so hard to try and remember how to pronounce his name. He has raised the issue that, quote, Commissioner Howard has demonstrated a consistent pattern of absenteeism, lack of transparency, and disregard for obligations under the Vancouver Charter, raising serious questions about her capacity to serve in public office. Now, I'm not exactly sure whether that's wholly true, because I think she's been paying very close attention to what her obligations under the Vancouver Charter are, and is meeting them at the bare minimum level.
She cites personal reasons for missing those meetings she could not make. You can request a specific leave if you have something that's above and beyond, I couldn't make it that day. If you have an illness that means you can't be functional at the role, you request an approved leave of absence. This is dereliction of duty, it feels like.
Yes. I feel, sometimes things happen, but also Park Board has become a very acrimonious place, and I understand why people might not enjoy sitting there. If you don't want to sit there, you should resign. So I think the solution's fairly clear. Well, I think it would be unfortunate for someone to have to forego their roundabout $18,000, $19,000 salary for sitting on the Park Board. I don't know that that alone is a good enough reason to kind of have your tenure as a commissioner continue in this sort of zombified state.
The Park Board does make some consequential decisions. Earlier this year, in a closed meeting, they decided to not have the Bright Nights fundraiser this year. The Stanley Park train that we've discussed way too often on this podcast is like not running.
Every time this fucking train comes up.
The Bright Nights firefighter fundraiser is moving to Surrey, where they will find a more welcome host, but Vancouver Park Board found quite the exciting opportunity to host one of those tacky-ass Harry Potter experiences that people can pay $50 an entry for. Somehow the members of the Park Board did not imagine that progressive Vancouver might have an issue, or at least some parts of it, with licensing a J.K. Rowling property.
It seems like people are just not paying attention sometimes, and I understand the impetus to stay away from the Harry Potter discourse. I get it if you just shut off and are happy to think of it as like, I remember those books. Those were cool.
Millennials have so much nostalgia for them, right? I know some parents who are like super excited to introduce it to their kids. These are pro-LGBT parents who just like compartmentalize and go, you know what? Artists, in this case, we'll just separate them.
I think there is a case to be made for death of the author when evaluating a work on its own. However, this isn't that. You're supporting J.K. Rowling and her corporation and activities when you license from her. She has a remarkable amount of control, more than most authors, over the intellectual property she created. She is using that power and the money generated from that to do some truly odious things. I think it was a mistake to do this.
Not to mention that the art itself is not aproblematic. There's so much racism and anti-Semitism in those books.
Yeah.
That we just, you look back and go, they named the Asian character Cho Chang.
Yeah, there is a fact that this is a story about a popular boy who is good at sports.
Yeah.
It's not really I know how it feels sometimes because he has this horrible home life at the beginning, and I think that speaks to a lot of people who don't feel like they have a place or would have loved to get a letter saying, hey, your entire life, guess what? You get to go to this school and it's going to be incredible and everyone's going to love you. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen at 11, that happens at 18, and then you go to college. And people get to find themselves there, but that's a long 7 years.
So naturally there are protests and letters and complaints. It's not clear the Park Board's going to renege because there's probably a pretty hefty contract already signed and things are underway.
She's also very litigious. Well, that's not the only time Vancouver's ever had a problem with a character from a fictional universe. We end every episode of the Cambie Report with a tidbit from Vancouver's history, and this time we are going to bring you the story of when David Duchovny got banned from Number 5 Orange, amongst other things.
This is a very nice write-up in Monte Cristo magazine by author Sam Weeb. The X-Files Vancouver and a Legendary Backlash. Famously, lots of episodes of The X-Files were taped in and around Metro Vancouver. Never an episode of X-Files set in Vancouver, because this is the city that never plays itself. There's so much spookiness in the forests and landscape around here that it was a good setting for X-Files. But famously, one of the problems with the show was it rains a lot here. They had talked for a while about moving it to Hollywood because the actors like to live in Hollywood. And so in October 1997, David Duchovny goes on Late Night with Conan O'Brien to promote the latest season and gets asked about Vancouver. And he goes, "It's a great city. If you like 400 inches of rain a day, it's like being in an Ice Age rainforest." And words that are true.
Those are true words. That is what Vancouver is like. I find it hard to fault him there. I give him license for the hyperbole, especially since it's so very clearly a hyperbole. But you know, people in Vancouver were shocked and so offended to find out that their city has rain.
It became a whole headline story. People just did not like someone disparaging the fine city. As you mentioned, the Number 5 Orange Strip Club, the Vancouver Institution, as it is described in its Google reviews, famously posted, "Hey, David Duchovny, after all we've done for you, you're barred. Believe it, if you show your face in here, we'll throw you out." I don't know how many times David visited the strippers.
I mean, from what I heard, maybe never, but I wouldn't stake a ton of money on never.
Apparently, we made his life a living hell for about 8 months. People egged his house, he continually apologized, and he even had to do a embarrassing skit with Tourism Vancouver to try to apologize to the city.
Dear Lord, we're very testy as a people. If he'd gone a little more harsh, maybe complained a little bit about some of the stuff that Vancouverites find annoying about the Sunday, this might have been a very endearing thing. Like, get 400 inches of rainy a day and there's nothing to do at night. Leaning into the no fun city stuff, maybe Vancouverites would have sympathized a little bit more. But alas, 8 months of hell it was for David Duchovny, and Vancouver covers itself in glory when talking about the weather. That brings us to the end of this episode of the Cambria Report. For Leg and Boot Media, I'm Matthew Naylor.
I'm Ian Bushfield.
Good night.